Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join today's Japan Sake Appreciation Program. My name is Mary Joyce, and I will be your MC for today. We are pleased to be presenting this sake pairing seminar to you today from the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center in Toranomon in Minatoku, Tokyo. First of all, before we begin, let's confirm what we would like to have you all ready for today's session. So first of all, we have the 6 bottles of sake which were sent to you for tasting, and also today's program. And we hope that you also have 6 glasses at the ready. Following today's seminar, we will also have some time for questions. Feel free to enter any that you may have via the Q&A button you will see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please also write who you would like to address the question to, any of the names of our presenters, or to all of our guests. You're welcome to add the questions during the program itself, and we very much look forward to receiving many of them on this opportunity. We will try to respond to as many questions as possible during the Q&A at the end of today's event. We also have one request. Following the program, we will be emailing you an online survey. We would be very grateful for your feedback and cooperation. So let's now proceed with today's event. I'm very happy to introduce you to each of today's presenters. First, we have here representing the organizers of today's seminar, the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association, Director Mr. Hitoshi Utsunomiya. And here we are also joined by Certified Sake Sommelier, Ms. Julia Malio. And then with us today virtually joining from Gifu Prefecture, I'm also very glad to introduce Mr. Darryl Cody Brailsford, originally from the United States and now a kurabito or brewmaster busy making sake at the Watanabe Sake Brewery in Gifu. Thank you to all our presenters, and Mr. Cody, we will see you again later in today's seminar. So to open up today, we will first have some words of greeting from Hitoshi Utsunomiya, Director of the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association, or JSS. Mr. Utsunomiya, over to you.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everyone. I'm Hitoshi Utsunomiya, Director of Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association. We thank you very much for joining this seminar today. At first, let me introduce our association briefly. JSS was founded 1953 in Japan. There are about 1,500 sake breweries and 300 shochu distilleries. And nearly all of them are members of our association. As you know, our original plan was to have sake pairing event at Meiji Kinenkan in Rio. But we had to change it to the online session due to the pandemic. When the pandemic is over in the near future, we'd like to have the actual sake and food pairing session with you. Unfortunately, today's webinar introduces only sake. But we hope that your discoveries of Japanese sake from this webinar could contribute to some enjoyment in your everyday life, especially while you are in Japan. Please enjoy the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Utsunomiya. Before we learn some more about sake from Sommelier Julia Malio, let's take a look at the process of brewing sake. The footage you're about to see is from the second sake sent to you today, the Tenzan Sake Brewery. Enjoy. Thank you very much. And now I am happy to hand over to certified sake sommelier Julia Maglio to learn more about the beverage. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mary. Hi and welcome, everyone. My name is Julia. I am originally Italian. I moved here in Tokyo in 2015, and I'm a sake sommelier. So today we're going to talk about sake together. Of course, there's a lot of topics when we talk about sake, but let's start from the basics. So sake is a fermented alcoholic beverage, which usually is about 15% of alcohol. So it is slightly stronger than your regular wine. But sake has a very long history, more than 1,000 years old. So in Japanese, it is referred to as Nihonshu. Nihon meaning Japan, and shu means alcohol or alcoholic beverage, but it is internationally known as sake. There are about 1,400 sake breweries all over Japan. Most of the breweries are family business or rather small business, but with a long history, and they all make their own specific and unique product. They all take very good pride in what they do, of course. But as we said before, so sake is a fermented drink, like beer and wine, but sake making process is very unique. So if we think about even just for the fermentation, just to compare these three beverages, please show the next slide. We can see here the how wine, beer, and sake are different. So when it comes to wine, as we all know, we start from grapes, and grapes already have sugar in it. So what we need to do is a single step, so convert that sugar into alcohol. But then when it comes to beer and sake, those two beverages are a little bit closer to each other, because for both we start from starch, and then we need to create the sugar, convert it to sugar, and then to alcohol. But then sake is unique because these two steps happens in the same tank. So is in Japanese is called multiple parallel fermentation, and it is unique to sake. So sake has a very unique making process, as we said, but for sake, so it takes about 3 months to be made. Most of sake is still produced in winter, and most of the steps are still handmade. When it comes to the brewing method, it is a quite complex brewing method, so we'll try to make it as simple as possible today. So sake has four ingredients. So we have rice, koji, yeast, and water. And these four elements are all equally important to make sake. Let's start talking about the rice a little bit, so we can see the next slide. So most of sake breweries use a specific rice called sakamai, or sake rice, which has a high concentration of starch in its core. So what we need to do, as you can see from the slide, we need to mill it to get close to the core, because that is where the flavor of the rice is. Depending on the milling ratio, as you can see from the next slide, we'll have a different type of sake. Rule of thumb is that the more the rice is milled, the more elegant and light the sake will be. The less it is milled, the more structured and rich sake is. But we'll get into more specifics a little bit later on. So after the milling, after the polishing of the rice, so next slide, please. So next thing to do is to wash and soak in water the rice and then steam it. After the steaming, there comes probably the most important step of the sake brewing, which is the mixing the rice with koji. Next slide, please. So this is called koji making process. Basically, steamed rice is moved to a specific room called the koji room, where it gets inoculated with the koji spores. As you can see from the picture, basically koji is kind of a powder which is sprinkled onto the rice. Koji is actually very common to find in Japanese cuisine. Japanese use koji to make soy sauce, to make mirin, to make miso, and so many other ingredients. And of course, to make sake as well. So this specific process takes 3 days. What happens in these 3 days is basically that so the koji breaks down the long starch molecules of rice and of course other ingredients as well to make smaller, shorter molecules, so that when during the fermentation we'll add the yeast will thrive. This is what happens. But so during this process, so Koji produces amino acids, which gives us the umami. I'm sure you heard of umami before. Umami is considered the fifth sense. We can call it as brothy or savory. Is basically what we feel when we drink dashi or miso soup, and of course sake. Sake has plenty of umami, and this is one of the reasons why it's so easy to pair with different cuisines. But then, so after the koji making process, that's when the main fermentation happens. Please show the next slide. So the rice is moved to a big tank, mixed with more rice, yeast and water, and then the fermentation will last 20 to 40 days, depending what kind of sake we are making. After the fermentation, sake is pressed. So we need to separate the rice paste that's left from the fermentation to the actual sake. After the pressing, sake can undergo extra steps, like for example, like aging or pasteurization. But so this is like the basic of how sake is produced. When we talk about sake types, we can definitely divide sake into two big categories. So we have junmai and non-junmai. You probably heard this word before. So junmai means pure rice. We can see the next slide, please. So junmai is pure rice dao, and this means that this kind of sake is only made with the 4 ingredients we mentioned earlier. But then the non-junmai one, a bit of distilled alcohol is added after the fermentation. Adding alcohol brings the flavors together and also extends shelf life a bit. But then, so within junmai and also non-junmai, we have subcategories depending on the milling ratio. So we start from junmai daiginjo, which means that the rice was milled up to 50%. And then junmai ginjo, the rice was milled up to 60%. When we see 60% on the bottle, it means 40% is gone. So 60% is what's left. And then junmai, we just call it junmai when we don't know the milling ratio. Same for the non-junmai area. We have, again, the names daiginjo and ginjo. So we know already they're respectively milled up to 50 and then 60%. And then we have honjozo, which is milled up to 70%. And futsushu, for this one, again, we don't know the milling ratio. Looking at this chart, it might look like one type of sake is better than the other one. Really, it's just about the personal taste. There's no better or worse. It's really a personal taste or the pairing with the food. Of course, when it comes to the food pairing, there's a lot of things we need to consider. So for today's pairing, actually, for today's tasting session, we chose a selection of junmai type of sake, but they're all very different from each other, as we'll see very soon. But this kind of sake definitely brings out the distinctiveness of Western cuisines. When it comes to sake pairing, we can see the next slide, please. We can definitely consider 2 factors. We can pair sake by contrast or by affinity. It is a bit similar to wine. We still want to look at the volume of the dish. But then pairing by contrast means that for example, if we have a dish which is very oily or really fishy, we can pair it with a sake that has a good acidity to balance the flavor. But then for the pairing by affinity, basically, we want to look for a sake that has the same characteristics as the dish, so that the sake can enhance those qualities, those characteristics. Another thing that we can consider when we pair sake is the regionality. We mentioned earlier, sake is produced all around Japan. And even if there's actually no black or white when it comes to sake, we can definitely divide like Northeast style as more light and delicate, and Southwest as more earthy, ricey, and rich. Another way to pair sake is looking at the serving temperatures. I'm sure you tried sake at different temperatures as well. So we can have it sake chilled room temperature and warm as well. Why we decide one temperature or another depends on many factors. It depends on the pairing with the dishes, of course. It can depend on the season. For example, on a very cold winter day, a hot sake can be a true blessing. It can be our own personal preference and so on. So there's a lot of things, of course, to consider. But definitely the most important thing to say is that you don't have to limit sake to Japanese food. But sake, as we said before, has a good umami, but also has a really good versatility. The main point of sake is that it supports food, and then so you can pair it with different kind of dishes and cuisines. For example, me being Italian, I love cooking Italian food and pairing with Japanese sake as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julia. That was truly fascinating. And now, what you have all been waiting for, we are happy to proceed to the sake tasting part of today's seminar. The bottles of sake sent to you for today each have a number on the back. We will be proceeding today in order, starting from number 1. So first, we invite you to pour some of the number 1, the Dewazakura Yamahai Hiya Oroshi, into a glass. And we would like to start our tasting time with the Japanese custom of kanpai, which you are no doubt already accustomed to. So we hope your glasses are ready. And Mr. Utsunomiya, over to you for the kanpai toast.
Is everyone ready? Say, kanpai.
Kanpai.
Kanpai. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. We had hoped to be able to welcome you all for today's event at the historic Meiji Kinenkan, where you could enjoy the sake paired with dishes served at splendid imperial banquets. Unfortunately, due to the current COVID-19 situation, that was not possible this time. But to give you at least a taste of the atmosphere and cuisine of the Meiji Kinenkan, we would like to share with you now a brief visual introduction. Meiji Kinenkan, also known as Constitution Memorial Hall, was built in 1881 as a dining and reception hall used for receiving important guests from abroad to the Akasaka Temporary Palace. It also served as the site of deliberations by the Imperial Council concerning the drafting of the Meiji Constitution. Since being relocated and rebuilt as the Meiji Kinenkan in 1947, the facility has carried forth its storied tradition of unparalleled service and attention to detail, hosting countless gatherings that have created wonderful memories for its guests. The dishes prepared for the sake pairing today are recreations of those which were served during imperial banquets over the years. As a starter, we have the foie gras terrine. This is paired with sake number 1, the Dewazakura Yamahai Tokubetsu Junmai Hiya Oroshi. Then we have the consomme soup with dumpling quenelles. This is paired with sake number 2, Shichida Junmai. Following is the fish gratin, paired with sake number 3, Denshin Yuki, or snow. The main, is the Beck-style beef fillet. For this, we have selected sake number 4, Shirakawa-go Junmai Ginjo Sasanigori. And on the menu for dessert is the panache-style ice cream. This is paired with sake number 5, the Shirayuki sake of Edo Genroku era. Next, let's explain the sake and cuisine pairings in a little more detail. And first, we will learn about the dish, the foie gras terrine, with sake number 1, the Dewazakura Yamahai Hiya Oroshi. The information about each of today's sake is also included in the program which was sent out to you. So please also refer to that as we proceed. And Julia, back to you.
Thank you so much. So our first sake is Dewa Zakura Yamahai Tokubetsu Junmai Hiyaoroshi. The name of this sake is Dewa Zakura, and I just want to explain a little bit more all the other words that you have right there. So Yamahai is a traditional sake brewing method. Nowadays, for most of sake, a bit of lactic acid is added into during the fermentation to basically protect sake from unwanted bacteria. But for the Yamahai method, the lactic acid isn't added. And so usually this type of sake is a bit more earthy, a bit more gamey, and has a hint of acidity. So tokubetsu junmai. So we learned already about junmai. So tokubetsu in Japanese means special. There are different reasons why a sake can be special, can be tokubetsu. Usually is about the milling ratio, like for this sake today, or depends on the type of rice used. Hiyaoroshi, most of sake after being pressed is pasteurized twice. But then this sake was pasteurized only once right after pressing. And then it was left maturing in the brewery for a few months before getting to you today. This sake, Dewa Zakura, comes from the Yamagata prefecture. So we are in the northern part of Honshu. Typically, Yamagata type of sake is more like light and soft. But today's sake is really, really unique and has a bit more flavor thanks to all these characteristics we just explained. So if we want to taste our sake first on the nose, it definitely has a hint of sweetness. We can feel it's really lively, but again, we can feel this maturing thanks to the brewing method. As for the taste, it is a bit brush, like all nama, all pasteurized sake. But the Yamahai method brings a delicate acidity followed by a welcoming sweetness, for sure. It has a hint of flower bouquet to me, but also light nuttiness that embrace the rich taste of the foie gras. So definitely welcomes the complexity of the dish, but has a long aftertaste with a bit of umami to it. What do you think?
そうですね。最初にこう口に入れた時は滑らかな感じがするんですが、その中で口の中に広がって非常に、コク、旨味を感じる酒だと思います。
Yes, indeed. When you first take a taste of this, it really has a very smooth taste to it. But as it then spreads more in your mouth, you can feel this deep sense and deep taste of umami.
この今日の中ではですね、17% と少しアルコール度数がこれが一番高い、酒なんです。で、全体的なこのヤマハイの酸の感じと相まって、フォアグラに負けない、しっかりとした味わいだと思います。
And out of all of the sake we will have today, this actually has the highest alcohol level at 17%. So you can see that this, together with its also slight acidity as well, means that it has quite a strong taste so that it won't be overpowered by the foie gras. Thank you very much. So we will now move to the second pairing of today, which is the consomme soup with quenelles and the Shichida Junmai, sake number 2. So let's invite you to pour this one into your glasses. Our sake number 2, Shichida Junmai, has a pairing between soup and sake, which is rather intriguing. Julia, could you tell us a little more about this?
Yes, thank you so much. So our second sake is Shichida Junmai. So yes, as you said, Mary, it is a really interesting pairing, having a consomme soup with sake. Soup can be also paired with wine sometimes, but definitely the way we will pair it will be completely different. But as we said, sake is really supportive of food in general. So this sake actually has a really good depth that goes very well with the round flavor of the dish. So this sake is Shichida is from the Saga prefecture. So this time we are in the Kyushu island. Usually sake from this region is a bit more structured, especially compared to the one we had before. So Shichida, so on the nose, let's get to the tasting. On the nose, it's definitely smooth. We can feel how balanced this sake is, but it has a clear complexity to it. It is indeed a very well-balanced sake. It has definitely hint of honey, a bit of melon to me, but it's nicely layered, so it has a good depth that goes very well with also the depth of the dish. It has though a nice clean, clear aftertaste, so it calls for definitely more broth. So Shichida is a really good example of umami for me. We were talking about umami before, but also has nice juicy flavor. Also, this sake, as you can see from the pamphlet, can be enjoyed chilled, room temperature, but also warm. So this also represents how sake can be versatile.
そうですね。これは本当に佐賀の酒のスタイルがよく出てると思います。単独で今飲むとですね、少し酸味が多いように感じられるかもわかりません。でもこのコンソメスープとの組み合わせでですね、ちょうどいいバランスになるということからこのお酒を今回選びました。
Yes, that's right. This is really truly a representative sake of the Saga prefectural style. On its own, drinking it like this, it perhaps seems a little bit acidic, but when this is combined with something like the consomme soup, it really comes to just the right balance.
ジュリアさんも言ったように、少しおかんという温度を上げても、これはよりバランスが良くなるかもわかりません。
And as Julia mentioned, this can also be drunk at a higher temperature. And with that, the balance can come through even more, perhaps.
この旨味というのは、この純米酒ですから、お米と水、それから麹しか使ってないわけなんですけど、この米のタンパク質からこの旨味が引き出されてるんですね。
And so, Julia, you explained umami before, but within a junmai sake like this as well, which is, of course, only made with the rice, the water, and the koji, it means that the carbohydrates from the rice is really coming through and bringing that out very strongly. Thank you very much. As a reminder, please feel free to share any questions that you have through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen at any time during the program, and we will respond to as many of these as we can at the end of the seminar. Before hearing from Julia about the next pairing, we would like to show you some video from the brewery which makes sake number 3, Denshin Yuki, the Ippongi Kubo Honten. So let's pour this into our glasses first, and please feel free to enjoy tasting the Denshin Yuki as you watch the video.
Oku-Echizen, one of Japan's foremost sake rice production areas. The sound of the autumn breeze tells us that the harvest season has come. With the arrival of the harvested rice, sake making begins. The rising smell of steamed rice and the sweet aroma of freshly filtered sake will surround the brewery until spring comes. As autumn deepens, people living in Oku-Echizen work diligently to prepare for the winter. Preparing food for the winter is a unique thing to do in snow country. With respect for the ingredients, people prepare food carefully while singing. Mount Hakusan, one of the 3 sacred mountains in Japan. Ippongi sake is made using the water that comes from the Mount Hakusan's melting snow. Rice, the blessing from the land, and water, the blessing from the mountain. With these two, Kurabito, brewing workers, make sake using their superb skills, which have been handed down for hundreds of years. At the end of sake making season, the singing of the people echoes through the town. Flames of the Dandoyaki bonfire rises up to the night sky. The long-awaited spring will soon arrive.
We hope that this helped give you an image of the place and the methods in which our next sake, Denshin Yuki, is being made. So we will now be hearing more about this third pairing, the fish gratin and Denshin Yuki, from Julia.
Thank you very much. It was a very beautiful video, as we were commenting with Utsunomiya-san earlier. So as you saw from the video, this sake Denshin Yuki comes from the Fukui prefecture. So we are on the west coast of Japan this time. So as you also saw, this area is really close to, the brewery itself is really close to Mount Hakusan, and this is where it sources its waters. And so this provides the brewery with clear and pure water. The result is this incredible sake that really tastes like fresh snow in a way. So let's go over to the tasting. On the nose, this sake really reminds me of cotton candy. It has a really nice sweetness to it. It's really light and very, very floral. It has a very clean, delicate, a very mellow flavor. It has a hint of mango, a bit of white pepper. It has a bit of a crispy side to it. So it reminds me of white pepper as well, but it's very, very light and not as layered, especially if we could compare it to the previous one. So this sake is actually really nice to balance the flavor of the dish in a way. So especially like thanks to its aftertaste, it really lets the dish to express itself at best. We can really say like Yuki, snow, the name of the sake, really reflects its birthplace. But the aftertaste also is a bit juicy, so it kind of calls for proteins. What do you think?
本当にこの雪という名前にふさわしいクリーンでピュアな感じがするお酒だと思います。今日も福井県ではおそらく雪が降っていると思います。
So yes, really, truly, as it is reflected in the name, Yuki and snow, this sake really has a very clean and pure sense to it as well. And I'm sure it's very likely that it's snowing today in Fukui as well.
ぜひ、その一つ前の酒、また最初の酒とかと比べながら飲んでいただくと、この酒の違いがよくわかると思います。
So I think if you're able to taste this and compare it to the two previous sake that we've tried today as well, you'll really be able to sense the difference.
この酒のピュアな感じというのは、この蔵の近くで採れる500万石という酒専用のお米があるんですが、それのにも影響しています。
And the very pure taste of this sake is actually coming from the fact that it is made from rice, which is grown very nearby. It's a very particular kind of rice made specifically for sake called 500万石 rice.
なぜ、この料理とこのお酒を合わせることを考えたのかというと、この料理のソースがオランデージュソースというレモンを使ったソースなんです。で、レモンとですね、この電信雪というのの相性が良くて、それでこれを選びました。
And the reason that we decided to pair this dish together with this particular sake is because, of course, the fish gratin has a hollandaise sauce which contains lemon. Lemon and denshin yuki really match very well together. Thank you very much. And now we will move on to our fourth pairing today, where we have the Beck style beef fillet with Shirakawago Junmai Ginjo Sasanigori, our sake number 4. But we have one piece of advice for you for when you are pouring this sake. You will see that number 4 actually has settled at the bottom of the bottle. So please shake it gently, like you can see now, before pouring it into your glass. You'll see that this sake is very different from any of the others that we have tried so far through these very distinctive characteristics. Julia, what can you tell us about this one?
Thank you so much. So our next sake is Shirakawago Junmai Ginjo Sasanigori. So I'm sure you heard of Shirakawago, this name before. This sake, Shirakawa, is a village located in the Gifu prefecture, which is famous for showcasing a building style called as Gasho Zukuri, which is quite famous all around the world. For it's like very pointy type of roofs. This Gifu area is quite touristic place itself, but Shirakawa is actually one of Japan's UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. So this brewery is interesting because they mostly make this type of sake. It's called Miwa Brewery, by the way. They mostly make nigori sake. We can call nigori as cloudy in English. You can clearly see why. But what I found very interesting about this brewery is their motto. So they saying, our sake is cloudy, but our thoughts are pure. I thought it was really interesting motto. But so what is nigori sake? Basically, there are two ways to achieve a cloudy sake or a nigori sake. So either during the pressing of the sake, they use a coarser mesh so that a little bit of the rice paste is allowed to go through, or they do a regular pressing and then they take part of the paste and kind of like put it back in the sake. But so this is definitely a unique feature of sake. We can't find this in like wine or other beverages for sure. Let's go to the tasting. So on the nose, of course, as you would expect, it is a bit ricey. But what hits me the most is its umami. But the fact that it is not as aggressive on the nose as you might think, is not as powerful. It is a really creamy type of sake, really, really tasty. It is a bit dry at the beginning, but then it turns into a juicy aftertaste with a good sweetness. This umami definitely calls for proteins, but also sugar at the same time. So today we paired this sake with beef fillet, so with meat, but I can definitely see this type of sake paired in a completely different way, maybe with melon or with a dessert, for example. Why not? So this is another example of how sake can be versatile.
なんかお餅のようなお米のお菓子を食べてるような感じがしますね。
It's almost like you're drinking an omochi or sweets that are made from rice in a way, isn't it?
これは笹濁りという名前なんですけど、笹というのは軽く濁ったということを表しています。もっと濃いような濁り酒も売られています。
So this particular sake is called sasa nigori, and the sasa here refers to, it's a very light kind of a cloudy sake. Amongst the other kinds of nigori sake, there are some which have a much deeper cloudy sense as well.
でこれは単独でもこうお菓子のように楽しめるんですけど、今日の料理はステークと組み合わせてみました。ステークの旨味をですね、さらに引き出してくれるし、テクスチャーも非常に面白い酒だと思います。
So this can be enjoyed on its own, where you can savor the quite sweet flavor that it has as well. But today we decide to pair it together with steak. The reason being that this also brings out the umami of the steak in a sense, and it really has a particular interesting texture to enjoy.
例えば日本でパン粉を使ったとんかつとかですね、カキフライがありますけど、こういったものとこの濁り酒を組み合わせるというのもいいペアリングだと思います。
In Japan, of course, we have different cuisine that uses panko or breadcrumbs, such as tonkatsu or fried oysters and so on. And you can also enjoy this kind of nigori sake together with these kinds of foods as well. Thank you very much. So our fifth pairing for today, which we will move to, is the panache style ice cream together with the shirayuki sake of Edo Genroku era, or sake number 5. Before that, I'd just like to kindly remind you that you can share any questions even during the seminar through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom display. So as we move on to this fifth pairing, some of you might be wondering whether sake actually goes well with such a sweet dessert as ice cream. Actually, I'm wondering this myself. So as you can pour this into your glasses, you will see that this one is also completely different to the others. Julia, what can you tell us about this pairing?
Thank you, Mary. So as you said, yes, this sake is, just the visual of this sake is completely different. It has a very beautiful amber color, completely different from all the sake that we had so far. This is really, really typical of an aged sake, but also shirayuki was made in a very specific way that the brewing of this sake is very, very unique. Let's get to this tasting first, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about how the sake was made. So as we said, for the visual, it has a very beautiful amber color, but then, so on the nose, the aging of the sake is very, very clear. It has hints of honey, you have a bit of caramel, a little bit of nuts, but then, so for the tasting, this sake has a very welcoming sweetness in a sense. It is really flavorful. And the reason why it's also so flavorful, it is because the milling ratio is definitely limited compared to other sake. So this sake was milled only 88%. So this is how it used to be from the past. Something that we definitely need to mention about the sake is that the sake brewery is one of the oldest sake brewery in Japan. Konishi Brewery was founded in 1550, and they still make this type of sake as they used to make during the Edo period. So of course, the milling ratio, as I said, it's limited compared to other sake, but also the quantity of water used is definitely reduced. They use basically half of the amount of water that normally is used for any other type of sake. But then, so this sake has really like a smoky side to it. It really reminds me of dried fruits, like dried apricots, for example. It definitely demands its presence at the beginning, but the sweetness that comes right after, it really creates a good combination with a dessert. So it really combines really nicely. But this is another example of how a sake can change or be versatile. As you also can see from the pamphlet that you have with you, this sake can be enjoyed at different temperatures, or you could also have it maybe on the rocks or diluted with water. Why not? Another example of its versatility. But is another sake that I can definitely see in other contests, maybe with, because it has a bit of astringency and bitterness, would be definitely served maybe as an aperitif with some dried seafood. What do you think?
そうですね。今回アイスクリームに合わせてるんですけど、別の食事のメニューと組み合わせる手もあると思います。非常に、独特の味わいがあって、想像が膨らむ、ペアリングの想像が膨らむ酒ですね。
Yes, indeed. Well, today we made the decision to pair this together with ice cream, but there's many other dishes that this could also be matched with as well. It has a very particular or unique flavor, which really means that you can use your imagination to think of different things that it can match with.
ジュリアさんのお話にもありましたが、この小西酒造というのは非常に歴史が古くて、江戸時代にはこれ伊丹に、兵庫県の伊丹にある酒蔵ですが、江戸時代には非常に多くのお酒が江戸に運ばれて消費されていました。浮世絵などもにもその白雪の銘柄が見られます。
As Julia mentioned, the Konishi Brewery is indeed one of the oldest breweries in Japan. It's based in Itami in Hyogo Prefecture, and many of the very popular sake that were made there were brought to Edo to be consumed and enjoyed there as well.
これは江戸時代の元禄の頃のお酒を小西さんの蔵から古文書が発見されて、それを再現したお酒だというふうに聞いています。
And so you mentioned that this is made in the style of the Genroku of the Edo era, but actually some old documents are said to have been found within the Konishi Brewery, and that is what they based the recipe to reproduce it exactly as it was made during that time.
食事の後にですね、今回、デザートと合わせたわけなんですけど、チーズと組み合わせるのもですね、非常に面白いと思います。
So today we're enjoying it with the dessert after the meal, but it could also be paired together and enjoyed with things like cheeses after a meal as well. I think that would also be quite a nice fit.
チーズといえば、ワインというのがよく言われますけど、ワインはチーズの味を洗い流して、次の食べるチーズが美味しくなるという効果があります。
So it's often said, of course, that cheese and wine go very well together. One of the reasons for this is when you enjoy wine together with cheese, it can kind of almost cleanse your palate in a way so that you can move on and enjoy the next or the different kind of cheese as well.
チーズも酒もうまみ成分を多く含むため、お酒とチーズをペアリングすると、チーズの味そのものがですね、よくわかると言われています。
However, cheese and sake, because they are both things that contain a great amount of umami, it means that when you pair them together, you can actually very much enjoy the cheese taste itself coming through.
最近ではヨーロッパのソムリエたちも注目の組み合わせです。
I've heard that this is a pairing which is receiving quite a lot of attention from sommeliers in Europe recently. Thank you very much. And moving on, Mr. Cody, sorry to keep you waiting, and thank you very much for your patience. We are happy now to present the final tasting of today, Horai Shinshu Shiboritate, or sake number 6. And with this, we will hear from Darryl Cody Brailsford of the Watanabe Brewery about the appeal of sake. Please enjoy tasting the Horai Shinshu Shiboritate brewed by Mr. Cody himself as you listen. So feel free to pour it first. Everyone, we hope you have your glass of Horai Shinshu Shiboritate ready. And Mr. Cody, over to you.
Thank you, Mary. I'm Cody with Watanabe Sake Brewery. I'm a brewmaster as well as the director over international sales and marketing. I'm happy to speak with you for a few minutes today about my journey with sake. So if you'll go to the next page, please. A little bit about my background. As you can see with my education, more or less, I was born and raised in America in a small town of Sundance, Utah. I actually finished my my career, or more or less degree, in the medical profession. So I have really zero knowledge about Japanese sake other than I really enjoy drinking it. And so I've been employed from Watanabe for the last 14 years, where I'm not only part of the production team, but I assist with different aspects as well, like this event. So if you go to the next page, please. I've always been fascinated with the Japanese culture and its traditions of making Japanese sake. However, I never thought I would be part of the production, let alone selling sake outside of Japan. My first acquaintance was drinking hot sake in Washington, D.C. while I was doing my doctoral degree. Then after moving to my wife's hometown of Hida Takayama, I was overwhelmingly shocked by the taste of the sake produced here versus the sake that I actually tasted in Washington, D.C. If you go to the next page, please. It's always been my dream to not only produce a sake here at Watanabe Sake Brewery, but also spread it throughout the world to those more or less sake fans, or more or less people that are hearing about my story and learning more about Japanese sake in general. And then in addition to that, it's always been my goal after starting here at Watanabe Sake Brewery that to actually at one point be eligible to become a certified Toji. And then other than that, my biggest dream is actually serving the United States president, as well as serving my sake on Air Force One. So those are some big dreams, but I don't think it's impossible. Go to the next page, please. Some of the things I find appealing as well as elegant and graceful is sake is has a wide variety of flavors, various luxurious flavors, flavors that dissipate like fruit, strong favorite flavors that kind of sink into your body. And then as Julie just mentioned, the taste of sake, the depth of sake in general, helps it pair with different cuisines as well, not other than just Japanese food in general. But the most important point I find that really distincts and is very graceful in general is the brewery's pride on the distinct local character of each sake and how it affiliates with the natural resources. Now, every brewery in general produces a different type of sake. The taste is entirely different. Now, the water that they use versus the rice, the yeast, how more or less the Toji produces that particular product in general is entirely different. So it makes more or less huge taste characteristics. And so it's very graceful as well as elegant, I think. Next please. A little bit about Watanabe Sake Brewery. We're home of Horai Sake. We've been established since 1890. We celebrated 150th year of production in 2020. Our current president is the 9th generation president, and our Toji-san, Kitaba Hiroji, is a Nambu Toji. Something unique about us is we actually have laughing fermentation. We actually believe for 365 days of the year, we actually play Japanese comedians playing to the moromi, actually. And we believe actually if the more or less moromi is a living microorganism, and so we believe that actually if the moromi is actually laughing when it ferments, it'll actually have the same effect on the customers when they drink it. So it's quite unique. I don't think I've ever heard another brewery do the same thing in general. Then besides that, we're more or less ranked #1 in 2020 with the worldwide Kuda ranking, as well as we've received various international and domestic trophy recognition as well. If you go to the next page, please. This is really a basic explanation of sake brewing in general. It goes from brown rice into polishing. When we receive the milled rice at its various stages, we wash it and then we steam it. Actually after steaming the rice, we roughly take about 20% of one tank, and we actually apply a tane koji, or it's called Aspergillus oryzae in general. And more or less after 2 days in the koji muro, or the koji room, we actually can more or less start a yeast starter or a shubo in general. Either shubos are 1 day or 1 week process, sometimes 2 weeks. It just really depends upon the sake in general that we're producing. And then after that, we more or less can start the moromi stage. It's referred to as the sandan jikomi, more or less. And more or less, it's actually over 4 days, actually. There's a first day, and then there's odori, more or less a dance or a resting stage for the yeast to more or less jumpstart itself and become stronger. And then over following 2 consecutive days, the process continues where we stick koji, water, and steamed rice in it. Roughly, it takes about 20 to 30 days with the sake that we produce here at Watanabe. And then it goes roughly into a pressing stage. And then into either low temperature storage or bottling. If you go to the next stage, please. I would like to kanpai with a 6 sake now. This is referred to as Horai's Shinshu Shiboritate. And so if everybody raise their glasses, please. Kanpai.
Kanpai.
This is a true example of a marriage of flavors, fruity, bold, savory, yet clean on the tongue. It's true, more or less, it's a true example of Horai in general. And the testimony of everyone that produces this sake. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cody. And thank you also for staying on with us for the Q&A session from now as well. So we're very happy now to move into the questions. Thank you very much, everybody who has been sharing your questions through the Zoom chat. We have a few coming in, and we'd like to start by asking, is the color a distinctive feature of sake? Perhaps Mr. Utsunomiya can teach us about this.
非常にこう色が元禄の酒っていうのが非常に色がついてますよね。で、これは熟成によって出てくる色なんです。
So you can see of the different sake we've drunk today, the genroku has a very deep tint to it as well. And this color is something that comes through the maturity process.
で、お酒の中に含まれる糖とアミノ酸が反応して、こういった色に変わっていきます。
And it's through the process actually of the reaction between the sugar and the amino acids which are in this sake, which brings it to this kind of color.
さらに貯蔵するとですね、かなりダークなアンバーになると思います。
And if it were to be matured even further, it would become an even darker or deeper amber.
その時はもう香りはちょっとコーヒーのようなカラメルの香りになると思います。
And the fragrance or the smell that you will have then actually comes to something close to even a coffee or a caramel. Thank you very much. We have another question. Maybe we can ask this of Julia. When do you drink warm or hot sakes, and how would you recommend you heat them up?
So to heat up sake, especially at home, let's try to make it like in a very easy way. So what you want to do is like a double batch. So you would warm up water in like a regular pot, and then if you have like a vessel, maybe like a ceramic vessel, in Japanese it's called tokuri, but if you have like a ceramic vessel, you pour a bit of your sake in this vessel, and then when the water is hot, you put this vessel in the hot water and you leave it there for a while until also the sake warms up. Definitely I wouldn't recommend things like microwave or things like that. So double batch.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that advice. We have another question for you. We opened quite a few bottles of sake today. How would you recommend that they be stored, and what is the shelf life after opening?
I would say the best thing to do for sake, we had all completely different type of sake. The best thing, like the easiest thing to do, will keep it in your refrigerator. Also because sake doesn't really like humidity or especially direct sunlight or direct light. So the best thing would be keep it into the refrigerator. And then I would say sake is a bit more forgiving than wine, for example. But in general, I would say like a week, 10 days life. If we think about a sake like genroku, like our aged sake right here, definitely is a bit stronger than the others. But for like an average sake, I'd say, yeah, a week to 10 days.
Thank you very much for that. So we'll proceed to the next question. And this is about which sake you would recommend would go with chocolate or fruits.
Oh, that's a very interesting question.
Maybe Mr. Utsunomiya-san could respond.
Yeah. チョコレートに対して、香りが似ていると考えると、この江戸元禄という組み合わせというのは一つ考えられます。
Well, I think one thing you could think of is to look for a sake that has somewhat of a similar fragrance to chocolate. And so of the ones we've had today, I would suggest pairing it with the Edo Genroku.
もう一つ、シャンドーヤというナッツクリームが入ったチョコレートがありますが、 それはですね、この濁り酒のクリーミーさがマッチします。
Or if you were going to look at chocolates which have, nutty cream in them or ganache and this sort of thing, I would recommend that you could try pairing them with a negori. Thank you very much for that. And we had another question about whether today's information will be made available afterwards. We're happy to let you know that we will make the archives available for you. So if you'd like to go back to any of the other information, you're welcome to look at it there. So thank you very much. We do acknowledge that we had a few more questions, but we are coming to the close of today. So we will not be able to respond to them all live. We will find another way, I'm sure, to communicate this information with you later on as well. Thank you so much for sharing all of these with us. And that brings us to today's Q&A session coming to an end. That also means that we've come to an end to today's seminar. Together with an email about the details of how to view the archives of today's seminar, we will also be sending to you an online survey to your email after the webinar concludes. And we would very much appreciate if you could spend a few minutes to share your feedback with us as well. For those of you who are logged into your Zoom account, the same survey will also be displayed on your screen at the end of the session, and you're welcome to fill that in instead. So once again, thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to join us today for the Japan Sake Appreciation Program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
Bye.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you.